pattern pickup.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to is it episode 104 of the Raw Men? And it is increasingly difficult in these trying times to find people to interview who are not only suggesting positive action to make things better, but they're actually working toward those ends. But I have an example of that today. I will be interviewing Andre Salais, and he is the architect behind the Atheist Candidates Program. Andre, why don't you tell us what the Atheist Candidates Program is?
Well, it's Atheist Candidates Project for anyone who decides to Google it. But essentially, and before I jump into that, I do want to comment on the difficulty of finding people to interview in these trying times. And it's everyone's really busy who has been active in politics and social issues, and it's becoming, with people sort of being pushed to their burnout point. I think it's becoming more difficult to find people who still have the energy to do these sorts of interviews, right? So it's something I completely understand, but I am available for interviews. So if anyone likes what they hear and you want to set up a time, let me know, and I will be happy to chat with you. So the Atheist Candidates Project is something that, for those of you who were at the American Atheist Conference, I got to present it there the year before this most recent conference. It's a project that is geared towards building an infrastructure around running atheists for public office. So we crowdsource political engagement by finding folks who are interested in running and maybe don't know how, finding volunteers who want to work for candidates, and professionals who are willing to offer their services to campaigns at whether full or discounted rates or whatever it may be. And we're working on a really interesting system to help candidates who are running for races that maybe don't have a lot of funding, like, a school board race or, county commissioners, aldermen and city council members in small towns, to be able to have access to professionals at a reduced cost, to make it possible for them to also run a professional campaign without, having to, mortgage their house to afford advice from a campaign manager, right? Now, the project, like I said, is just crowdsourcing political engagements among atheists. We've brought in a little bit of money and have been doing some advertising, but I'd like to be able to launch a billboard campaign. So at some point, I am going to ask you for your money. So please hold on at least until that point, and then you can tune out before they ask.
Okay, brilliant. So I understand that Arizona, being a very being a very conservative state. I mean, I lived there for many years. I was surprised to see, and we talked about this once before, the number of atheist candidates who'd had victories in, is it the Sunshine State? No,
That's Florida. We're the Grand Canyon State.
Grand Canyon State, because you're the one that has the sun on the flag.
Yes, because we have more sun than Florida, actually. So we get an average of 4 days of rain each year. So it's a little dry here, but lack of rain means lack of clouds typically, and keeps it nice and sunny.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about the number of atheist candidates that you had in Arizona, because the next convention, the National Convention of American Atheists, is going to be in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be interested in meeting some of these candidates and possibly even having some at that convention, maybe even speaking. I don't know. We haven't worked that out yet, but that would be interesting. And
well, I can help you find dozens of them.
Well, give me the most interesting campaigns you worked on. That would, I think, is what people want to hear.
Oh, sure. So I think I'll want to talk a little bit about Arizona for and kind of why we have so many candidates running before I get into the campaigns, and then the campaign I want to talk about is the one that really taught us a lot of lessons about running atheists in Arizona. And I think when most people look at Arizona, especially if they're watching John Oliver and The Daily Show, and if they're on MSNBC, they see it as a conservative, kind of a conservative nightmare, and it's really not. It's our government is much more conservative than our state is, and we have pockets where serious conservatism is still the norm. Like Prescott, Arizona hosted a Donald Trump rally during the campaign, his presidential campaign, and they have the distinction of having the highest number of knives removed from people who wanted to attend the rally as supporters. Just the highest number of overall weapons, I believe, is what it was, were in at an Arizona rally. So kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. But what we discovered here is that even with us leaning conservative, atheists can run and they can win. And when they can't win, because it's statistically not possible, they can make a difference for future atheists who want to run for office. So the person I think had the biggest impact as a candidate on that is actually James Woods, and he spoke at the American Atheists Convention in 2012, I believe. So if you want to find his talk there, you can look that up on YouTube. Um, he ran for Congress in Congressional District 5 against, at the time, Matt Salmon, who was replaced by Andy Biggs. And I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with Andy Biggs. This district is 4 points more conservative than the state of Alabama. It is the most conservative congressional district in the country. And he ran in this district and secured more votes than any Democrat running in that district previously, which is exciting. But he didn't run as an atheist. And this is, I think, the thing I want to explain here is if you run as an atheist, and we can turn this into a little bit of a dialogue. If you are running as an atheist, what does that even mean?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I mean, in my district, when I tried to run for Texas State Senate, and I realize I look the part, which didn't help, but they want to associate it, especially here in Texas, and I know that they do this in Arizona as well. If you aren't a Christian, well, then you're satanic. Even if you're Muslim, you're still satanic, or Hindu. One lady told me in a checkout line here in town that if it ain't from Jesus, it's of the devil. Is that what you were going for?
No, not really, but I mean that's pretty accurate. There's these preconceptions that come with the word atheist, but when you give just the word atheist, that's the picture that people like to paint, right? That we can't argue with that. I mean, we had Athena Salmon gave a humanist invocation that was inclusive. I think used the word atheist along with a whole bunch of other religious and non-religious identities as part of her invocation at the legislature, and they had another prayer in repentance. So this is
another prayer in repentance.
In repentance. Oh wait, no, this was Juan Mendez. Hers was stopped on the grounds that humanity does not constitute a higher power. So this is kind of the norm if you're leading with the word atheist. Now, I can already feel the angst of people rising on the other side of the headphones here. Well, why aren't you talking about being an atheist? Well, you are. The difference is your platform isn't I'm an atheist. Your platform is science-based sex education, protection of bodily autonomy, including a woman's right to choose, investment in the sciences, access to quality public education for all students, science-based policy around agriculture and climate change, and these are the things that make up a platform, not being an atheist. And when you step out as an open atheist and you're also saying, I'm also a feminist, I'm also for a woman's right to choose, I support marriage equality, I support science-based education, you are providing them something different from, well, atheists are all devil worshippers, atheists are just angry and bad people. You are showing them a person who is an atheist with whom this individual voter might share a lot of values. That's what makes the difference. The identity in Arizona and nationally, I guarantee this applies nationally, isn't as big an issue as the values. And when you are providing them values that they can relate to, that helps to break down the barriers that atheists face when they run for public office, because they're not voting for the atheist when they go to the polls. They're voting for this person who supports a lot of the things that I support, who is also an atheist and open about it. And that's why actually I want to talk about James Woods so much, is he did exactly that. the atheism question came up a lot. And it had some virality to it, but the things that really made a difference were some of his policy positions. But he would get interviews and they would want to ask him about his atheism, and he would say, yeah, I'm an atheist, and he'd talk about kind of what it means to him, and then he would talk about policy. So the
Yeah.
things that you're getting is, atheist atheist Democrat running for Congress in Arizona, and then the whole article or the whole interview is about policy things that this atheist happens to believe in. You're not shying away from being an atheist in the same way that, Mayor Pete Buttigieg isn't shying away from being a gay man.
He's gay?
Being gay, being gay isn't what he's running on. And I think for any atheist who wants to run for public office, you shouldn't be running on being an atheist. You should have actual policy positions. You should have views and opinions and values that you run on as an open atheist. That's what makes the big difference.
Well, I obviously was I couldn't hardly shy away from being an atheist, but that had nothing whatsoever to do with why I was running. I mean,
No, of course
I was
not.
running,
Yeah.
I was running on policy ideas, and I didn't have as many as the other guy there was another candidate that was running that I decided he's just better at this than me, so I'm just going to pass it over to him, and I'm glad that I did. But the people I was running against were absolutely deplorable. This guy, the Republican incumbent, all he was about was, I mean, and it's funny that I'm on the left, so I would be the one that would typically be accused of identity politics, I guess. But this guy was all about identity politics. I mean, he was a Tea Partier, and he's a Tea Party believer, is the way he described himself. And the
Well,
only
I mean, it's only identity politics if it's not white identity politics, right? Like Donald Trump ran a campaign on white identity politics, and the everything else, if it's identity that's not white, counts as identity politics.
Okay, now I've always been trying to understand that. So anyway, this guy, his only thing, his primary platform was to prevent trans people from being able to pee in public restrooms. That was his primary platform. And somehow or other, that guy still won.
Yeah.
And he didn't just beat
Yeah.
the Democrat. The Republicans realized, because you have moderate Republicans, they still exist. And so they realized that he was so far right wing that he was an embarrassment to the party.
Yeah.
And so they tried to run their own person against him, and unfortunately, because I don't know where the religious right gets all the money that they do, but I was told in a regular campaign year that you would need to have $35,000 for your campaign to begin, right?
Hmm.
And he got, his initial donation was $2 million.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a landslide in funding.
Yeah.
Wow. And your legislative races are relatively cheap compared to ours. Ours are about a third more expensive here. For the candidates who are running on clean funding. For the other candidates who run traditionally, they get significantly pricier than that. They get up into the six figures. But it's Arizona. We like to let dark money run free. So
What can we do about that?
well, about dark money.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually not one of the core values being addressed by the Atheist Candidates Project. It's if we want to talk about how I feel personally about it, I think at least requiring full disclosure of independent expenditures. That's when someone who's not the campaign is spending money to benefit the campaign. Requiring full disclosure of the origins of that money would be a good first step, and that's something we're trying to do here in Arizona. Citizens United has to die. That's another route, but that's even more difficult than getting ballot initiatives passed in your individual state. So, if you have a campaign like that happening in your state, it might be something to donate to, volunteer for a little bit, go out and collect some signatures for it, and hopefully you can get it on the ballot and get it passed.
One of the things that struck me about that campaign was, before the guy came up with his own $2 million for his $21,000 a year job, I was told that you have to have a campaign begin with $35,000. That's what my district tipping with, and you go up from there. And
never mind. I said it was cheaper. Yours are more expensive. I take it back.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing was that in Britain, depending on the type of election, they are capped at 35,000 pounds, where they're not allowed to spend more than that.
Oh yeah, that
So
sounds like a great idea to me.
yeah, I realize I'm ignoring the difference between dollars and pounds, but still starting at 35,000 and going up in the United States and stopping at 35,000. You can't go any higher in Britain. Now that which way is going to be more corrupt? Especially since I don't have
Mhm.
to receive donations just within my district or just within my state. I could receive unlimited donations from anybody in the country. It can be
Yep.
an American citizen living in Dubai, and they could donate to any Texas state Senate position. They can donate as much as they want.
I worked a congressional campaign this last cycle, and one of our first big fundraising pushes involved fundraising out of California, Illinois, and New York. And that's just normal. You look for who out of state in these three target markets donated to other Democratic candidates running in your state, and you reach out to them, or you find the fundraiser who contacted them, and pay them to fundraise for you. But it's the norm, and the part of, I think, one of the big issues that we're dealing with isn't just that we're living in what's being called a post fact political scenario, but we're living in a low information government right now, not just post fact. And this is another reason, of course, that we ought to be electing atheists. Is most Americans who are atheists didn't arrive at atheism in their households when they were growing up. It wasn't that they just weren't exposed to religion, because there's no child in this country who's not having Jesus forced on them at some point in their life, right? Um, Americans who are atheists become atheists, either because they're sick and tired of the church and they just kind of fall out of it, but usually because they've lost belief in some way or another. They've deconverted, and that requires some modicum of critical thinking. There's a process of thought that happens there. That critical thinking that's core to our communities, especially core to our activist communities, the skepticism that comes with it, is something that we need when we're evaluating policy like campaign finance reform. It reaches much further than just issues that are typically under attack by religion. I mean, we can talk about bodily autonomy and secular education, and equality under the law, secular government, things of that nature. But when you remove facts and critical thinking from the process of making laws and from the process of assessing the constitutionality of those laws or the applicability of those laws in the courts, um, you are eroding your democratic system. The rules only work if we have people who are, one, honest about engaging with those rules, and um, actually making an effort to critically examine the policy that we're creating, and the choices of judges or what have you.
Whenever we get to talk about politics, it reminds me how naive I am when I think about how corrupt our system has gotten, the way that it has gotten corrupt, where the people who are in power, if you get any collection of quotes from almost any senator in almost any state, you're going to realize this guy's an idiot. And the reason that it reminds me of how naive I am is I remember when I was a little boy and I first became aware of a political situation at all, it was because of Watergate with Nixon. And until that time, I was always under the impression that people were elected to offices like the president because they were smarter than everybody else. And of course, you would want the smartest guy in power. And that's why I feel like a bit naive, because that's obviously not the case. I can't think of any time that the smartest person was elected.
Well, and yeah, I could say I'd agree with that. And I think I'm more in your camp, but there is also an argument to be made for why someone who's perhaps not the smartest individual in the country should be in office. You want the smart people in office, but you also want people with practical life experience. Like having someone who worked in manufacturing in Ohio and Michigan would be valuable in Congress. Having a surgeon, maybe not the smartest human being, but that practical experience is valuable when we're talking about medicine. Having teachers when we're talking about education policy, like all of these are good things. But I think that
What if we took a
regardless
brain
of what camp
surgeon?
we're in, we at least don't want the dumbest person.
What if we took the one smart guy, the brain surgeon, and put him in charge of housing?
Yeah, see, what I'm talking about is skills applying to specific areas of policy, right? And the one smart guy we're referring to said he wasn't qualified to be the Secretary of Human and Health Services, but now he's running housing, which doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But this is again the reason we need critical thinkers to be in public office, and another reason to elect atheists.
Well, I saw in the news today, and probably if you're politically interested, you may have too, that Boris Johnson has selected his team and has apparently done the same as
Mhm.
Trump has done to find the least competent person for each task.
So he went through the extras pool from Monty Python's Flying Circus, I'm guessing.
Yeah, perhaps. So because as we mentioned with Carson being in charge of housing, and we can go through the list of Betsy DeVos and education, and
Yeah.
Rick Perry for Department of Energy, and so on. Everybody seemingly chosen specifically because they wanted to destroy the department they're now in charge of.
So the parallel that we have here, and I'm sure, I don't know if Michael Marshall listens to this. I'm sure he'd be willing to chime in on your maybe chime in on your show at some point about it and what the British are actually observing. But the when we have ideological commitment outweighing qualifications, we have a problem. We have a guaranteed erosion of the institutions that we need for our countries to survive. I mean, look at the hollowing out of the Department of Agriculture that's happening right now. The same Department of Agriculture that was responsible for finding out how to mass produce penicillin. Um, like this is We have decades of science on the line when 80% to 90% of those scientists walk off of their jobs because the Trump administration has decided to relocate the Department of Agriculture to, I believe, Kansas City, a place where they have no offices for them, right? Like, all because the Department of Agriculture keeps producing science that doesn't align with what the party believes to be true. That is a problem. We cannot have a functioning government without people who respect scientific authority. Period. Maybe not authority, but consensus is maybe
That would
what I'm
be a
getting
better,
at there.
yeah.
Consensus would be what I'm. Well, and I think authority because it's 97% of climate scientists in fields related to climate
I think the word we're
agreeing that
looking for is
human-based climate
expertise.
change is a thing. But expertise would be probably the better word to put there. Um, we simply cannot have that. And I keep dragging this right back to the Atheist Candidates Project to try to paint it, to try to convey the reasons we need critical thinkers and atheists in public office is if you are in a scenario where the science disagrees with your opinion and there's now a consensus that has formed, or maybe we don't have a consensus, maybe climate change, for example, let's use climate change. Some series of repeated and peer-reviewed verified studies comes out suggesting that climate change is in fact not caused by human activity, that maybe it's contributing to it, but there's some sort of geological anomaly that is increasing the pace of climate change more rapidly than humans can be credited for. Um, if the scientific consensus begins moving in that direction and we no longer have a consensus, your view might be, well, the majority opinion still supports climate change, but these are some interesting studies and we should probably take them seriously, right? If it shifts the opposite direction, you would change your mind.
No,
Now,
that's completely true. And in either case,
mhm,
if it was shown that the climate change is happening and is predominantly because of, if it's predominantly anthropogenic, or if climate change is happening and it is a geothermal kind of thing, like another a building, say flood basalt, something like that. Because I understand something about paleo history, I know how incredibly devastating that would be, and that would actually put more impetus on
on a
people to try
requirement
to
to do
counter it.
something.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
because that kills everything.
Yeah. But
The most significant extinction level events, three of the most significant extinction level events we've ever had, including the Cretaceous Paleogene, were largely attributed to flood basalts. including the one that just coincidentally also happened to have a comment involved.
Yeah. Well, and at the base of that, though, the understanding here is that you would change your mind,
Yes.
given the information, right?
And an important counterpoint to that, if you don't mind my interjecting, one of the problems that I had with people electing what they said, people that were strong in their convictions and firm in their faith. If you're electing that person to be a judge or a sovereign over you, they have already judged your situation regardless of the evidence. They're
They
strong in
have.
their faith and firm in their convictions. That means
Hmm.
that they're not going to change their minds according to the data, which means you've just fucked yourself.
Hmm. Well, and I'm using climate change as an example because I mean there are religious arguments that are made against it, which are really just even nonsense under most religious worldviews. But the primary impetus in opposition to climate change is ideological. They will lie uh, in order to defend an ideologically rooted position. Um, we don't do that. If we are wrong and we change our minds. Period.
Correct.
That's how it works. And this also is a reason that we have to argue on policy while being an open atheist, because people will vote for the better Christian in the race, regardless of what other beliefs they might have or what their. I mean, we narrowly squeaked out a victory over Roy Moore in Alabama, a credibly accused child molester. Narrowly squeaked out a victory there because he was the better Christian in the race by simply not being a Democrat, right?
Mm-hmm.
If
Even though
we,
hadn't he been like kicked off the bench twice for the Ten Commandments
yeah,
being.
yeah, he'd been
Yeah.
removed twice for judicial misconduct of some sort. But if we do not give people a reason to vote for us, if we don't give them a reason to have a conversation with us about policy, we are not going to get those votes. Our hill is steeper than theirs is. But the only way we climb it and actually get over to the other side is by talking to people about policy on things that matter to them personally. And that's what elections are all about. It's the reason people knock on doors to go talk to voters, is they have conversations with voters about policy and about the candidate. They talk to human beings. And that human relationship that you can build between an atheist and a voter who maybe isn't an atheist or doesn't care or whatever their identity may be, that's the thing that's going to make the difference. Humanizing that person who's running and connecting with people on the issues that matter to them most, period.
Did you happen to catch any of the Democratic debate while you were out in traffic this evening?
It's actually playing in the other room right now. Yeah,
One of the
I'm missing
things
it.
that caught my attention was we have this division between we have the progressives and the moderates and the
Mhm.
conservatives all I know that there's a better name. They're not conservatives. What are the establishment corporatists or whatever? And these are the people that keep bringing up radical changes and they're trying to say that anything we do to try to fix anything is going to be too much. We shouldn't do all of that. So we should just leave things broken. And that's the attitude that I see. I mean, it's been broken my entire life. We know that it's broken. We know how to fix it, but we're not going to, because we're going to call that radical. And I
Yeah.
think the reason we're calling it radical is because it might impair our fiscal quarter.
So I disagree with the reasoning on that. And so to be clear, I want to be clear. A lot of this is my personal opinion that does not reflect the Atheist Candidates Project. The Atheist Candidates Project is nonpartisan. However, I mean, it seems pretty obvious that there's one party that's openly hostile towards our existence. So we don't tend to pick up a whole lot of conservatives. But if you're a conservative and you want to run as an open atheist, by all means, if you're okay with secular government, freedom of the press, equality under the law, fact-based politics, bodily autonomy, and secular education, then we will help you run. We need to spread this movement into all parties, not just one.
That's a good point
But
that you brought up.
what I I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to James Woods. You started this mentioning James Woods. Wasn't he running as a conservative?
No, he was a liberal, very progressive. He used the F word, feminist, in his campaign regularly, self-identifying. So that would not have flown. That's not something that would fly with the Republicans. But what I can tell you about something now, compared to then, is he actually had a very pleasant discussion with his Republican opponent. They were on good terms with each other. They were respectful to each other. That is, I can't imagine that happening now. It's a very different political climate. So for those of you who are conservative who don't have a place to go, and maybe you've become an independent, or maybe you're still holding on to the Republican badge in hopes that the Trump portion of the party dies off. I have bad news; it's not going to. But if you are still a conservative who's an atheist and you feel like you don't have a place where you belong, as long as you are okay with these fundamental principles of the project, the ones I listed off, then you are welcome to run with us. Now, I want to be clear. Most of the folks who are interested in running with the Atheist Candidates Project are more progressive. That's the side that they're on, and that's definitely the side that I'm on. So to get to the question that you asked earlier about the corporatists who don't want to do anything, and they're calling it radical. I think, of course, there's a percentage who are worried about the bottom line, and whether or not their donors from whatever industry it is that's going to be impacted by switching to clean energy will continue to donate. I don't think that's the biggest motivator behind these positions. I think it's honestly a combination of being slightly naive to the present circumstances that we're in, because for decades we have lived with relative I mean, it's not been perfect, but with a degree of predictability and comfort that we now don't have, and it's just hard to believe that scenario is as catastrophic. Emotionally, it's harder to connect to that catastrophe that's coming when you've never had a catastrophe in your life. This has been a great peace, and even the Great Recession wasn't comparatively one of the worst things Americans have experienced. Now, if you imagine a generation after the Second World War, where you have a global military conflict where tens of millions of people are dead, that has a bit of a different psychological effect on entire generations following it than decades of relative prosperity and peace,
Well,
right?
yeah, I understand what you're talking about the ease that
Mm-hmm.
we've been living through, and the, frankly, we've been oblivious as well. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
look at single use plastics. We don't even pay attention to. We will buy a glass jar or a plastic bottle, and we empty it out and we throw it away automatically, and we
Mhm.
don't realize that that ends up around the neck of a seal or
Yeah.
whatever or it ends up in a floating island the size of Australia in the Pacific somewhere. Nobody thinks about that because we don't
No.
see it. It's not part of our everyday routine. And the
Well, it's kind
things.
of like how what I do for work is actually public relations on infrastructure projects, right? And
Mhm.
it's something that no one thinks about because we drive on roads every day. We see the traffic lights all the time. The electricity always just turns on. Like we're it's like how a fish doesn't know it's in water, right?
Mhm.
You're surrounded by it, so you're unaware of it because it's become something that is just fundamentally environmental, right?
That phrase
Um,
that they used to use for domestic situations, you're too close to the situation to see it.
Mhm. And today I made myself some soup for lunch, right?
Mhm.
Ramen appropriately. Um, and it was ramen noodles, and those came in a plastic container, and in the plastic container were 2 more plastic containers. Those plastic containers were transported in a plastic bag from the grocery store because they didn't have any more paper bags. And I added some scallions to it. Those came with a plastic band around them. Some garlic that came in a plastic box. And what else? Some gyoza that came in a plastic bag that was in a paper box that was covered in plastic.
I was just in
So I
Mexico.
could have one bowl of soup.
I was just in Mexico a few days ago, and we went through a grocery store there, and the grocery store did not give paper bags or plastic bags. They would sell you a cloth bag that you are to
Mhm.
return to the grocery store with the next time you need to go shopping.
Yeah, it's the same with glass bottles there. You just bring the bottles back and you get a credit for it, right? This isn't hard. It's not like we haven't done this before. And you go to have you been to France, Spain, Germany,
I have been to France and Germany.
France? So in France, I'm sure you noticed there's a lot of open air markets. People typically bring their own bags, and they shop, once a week. they might get some bread that's going to come in a paper bag, and these individual vegetables aren't covered in plastics and all these shipping containers. They're brought there by the producers, right? But you go to a grocery store, they've got supermarkets in France. There's supermarkets everywhere in the world, right? You go to a typical supermarket that an American might feel more comfortable shopping at, and everything's in plastic.
Yeah.
It's the reality of the conditions that we've created for us to consume these products.
And when they
This
talk
has
about when the conservatives talk about going back to the good old days, they're actually talking about a period of time when we didn't have so much plastic. I mean, when this was
no.
when glass bottles of milk were brought to your door by the milkman, and when everything was in bins.
Hmm.
So I'm old enough that I can remember when I was very young that everything was in bins like this. And when they've started bringing back some bins in some like co-op stores, but
Oh yeah, we
not
get some
many.
products that we have to take in the glass containers. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
And
mean, it's like you said, it's not like we haven't done this before. But the reason that I brought up all these environmental
and I,
issues
I
was,
think we're also diverting about 3/4 of our garbage from the landfill in this house. So like compost in the backyard. Um, so that's obviously not everyone's going to be composting in your apartments, right?
yeah,
But there's if you're just careful about what you throw in the waste bin, it's relatively easy to prevent landfilling things that could otherwise be you
yeah,
know
I'm personally
recycled.
embarrassed at how much trash my house produces,
You
and
never
it's
realize it until you actually take an account of it.
well, it's like you said, it's the way that you purchase it. I mean, we can't if we buy a jar of pickles, it's either going to be a glass jar or it's going to be a plastic jar,
Hmm.
and nobody can do anything with the plastic jar except throw it away. And I think we can take it into recycling now, but I got a glass jar of pickles. I can't take the glass jar back, right? So, but the reason that I brought up these environmental issues was there are bigger issues that there's not. If everybody could cooperate, everybody wants to be as environmentally green as they possibly can be. They're still not going to solve the problem. It has to be systemic. It has to be from the top
It
down.
does, yeah.
And the changes that we have to make to fix things are increasingly desperate. There's more and
Mhm.
more that we have to do than people are prepared to do. In the last, like in the 2016 election, when they were talking about the environment, I remember that Hillary was saying, "Well, we'll do things incrementally," which means we're still going to keep doing the damage. We're
Yeah.
just doing the damage slower.
Well,
Well,
true,
we can't
and
get
there
away with that anymore. We've actually got to reverse what we're doing, and that requires what the corporate establishment wants to say is radical change.
yeah. Well, and there was another component to that when we're talking about what constitutes, radical change, right? I mentioned the naivety towards our present circumstances that we're living in, and simply due to not being able to conceive of it because of the relative privilege that we've lived with as a society, right? And before I get some angry tweets about that, I recognize disparities in privilege. I mean, as developed countries, we have lived with a degree of relative privilege in spite of all of the problems that we have. Um, the other side of that is not being able to see rapid and transformative change is something that government can accomplish anymore, in part because we haven't done it for so long, and because our government is deliberately designed to move slowly. It's like trying to turn an aircraft carrier on a dime. It's just no, oh, good. There's a cat here now. Sorry about that. It's like trying to turn an aircraft carrier on a dime. You can't. You can't. I mean, I'm sure there's someone who could probably do it, right? But it's going to take a hell of a lot of effort, and you're going to need a lot of people coordinating to get it done.
And the other
And
problem is,
we
I'm
just
sorry,
don't think we can.
yeah, the other problem is that we clearly are an oligarchy, and so
Hmm.
what is really governing this power are financial interests that don't want to improve the situation and don't want to admit that it exists.
Yeah, we've established the wrong norms on top of that. I mean, there was a time when the GOP, and I'm not using them as a punching bag. I'm using them as a deliberate example here, where the GOP was actually for Social Security. They
Yep.
supported expanded Medicare and Medicare for all. Republicans were trying to expand healthcare to all Americans. There was a time when the Republican Party accepted climate change.
There was a
So. So to not use the Republicans as a punching bag and recognize that there are people in the Democratic Party, which is the party that we usually think of as the New Deal party, right, who are no longer believe that we can accomplish big things,
So on
shows
a
you how
comparison
drastically our discourse around these issues has changed.
to explain this comparison that you're talking about how the Republican Party used to support this or that. Were this the year that I was born, then I would have been a Republican. In the early 60s when I was born, I would have been a Republican, because back then the Democratic Party really was the party that was started, that was predominantly for the KKK and that sort of thing. And those two parties have largely switched positions on a lot of issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and it was the
so
Civil
we
Rights
know
Act
that,
of 1964 that put the nail in the coffin for the Democrats running in the South.
yeah. So there was, I'm aware that things evolve, that things change over time. And I'm also aware of speciation, where one single population can slowly divide into two very distinct ones. And when I was in my 20s, I remember having no idea whether I would be classified as a Democrat or a Republican. I went to the Iowa caucus and they asked me, which party am I? And I honestly had no idea.
Yeah.
And I really couldn't tell them apart. And then I remember around 2000, I read the party platform for both, and they were virtually identical. The Republican side was slightly more religious.
Mhm. And
And
what we're seeing now isn't it seems radical when you don't believe big change can be achieved, right? It seems radical if it seems unnecessary because you don't understand emotionally the catastrophe that's coming, right? So applying the word radical to it is just a wrong application of the word. What they're saying is it feels radical because to them, the idea of turning that aircraft carrier on a dime is inconceivable when other people have done it before.
well, here's another problem, and this is one of the things that I was happy with Elon Musk for forcing electric car technology out into the open so that people could see it. The
Mhm.
first time I'd ever heard about electric cars that were quicker and faster than some imports and such was back in 1988,
Yeah,
and
there's an incredible electric car that was built in the '80s that, just never made it.
yeah, and then they impounded them. So, and I thought this was a huge conspiracy theory sort of
Well, I
a
mean,
thing.
it didn't help that the batteries had a habit of igniting, but
Yeah, yeah,
they're much safer now.
I
Yeah,
didn't even
much safer
believe
now.
the stories that electric cars were being taken away and impounded in the desert just to prevent people from having electric cars. I thought that was a paranoid conspiracy theory until I saw the CEO of Chevrolet apologize for having made that decision.
Yeah,
And so they wanted to keep us all addicted to fossil fuels. Now, when you talk about these people who are afraid of radical change to fix things, try explaining to somebody that you're going to take all these millions of cars. And I had this conversation just like 4 years ago where somebody was saying that they were working for Isuzu, and Isuzu was coming out with much more efficient internal combustion engines to be coming out in 5 years. Well, why are you working on internal combustion engines for 5 years from now? Everything's going to be electric in 5 years. Why aren't we moving that way? And so they would come up with every excuse they could for why that was too radical, why that can't happen, right?
yeah,
We can't start charging batteries and replacing gas stations and shutting down the fuel companies that and all of that. That was entirely too radical, especially over this short period of time. And then look what's happening now. We're realistically looking at not having internal combustion engines
yes,
in this decade, right?
yes, we are.
None at all. In 10 years
Yeah,
from now, there won't
the
be a there won't
the
be a there won't be a gasoline car being sold within 10 years.
the
In 5
allegedly
years,
radical change is happening, whether we like it or not. The question is it happening fast enough?
yes, and,
Um,
environmentally, radical changes are happening as well, and we better stay on top of those.
mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. So, and part of the when we're talking about the electric car situation is an interesting one, and we're talking about fossil fuel interests here now, and the ability of the fossil fuel industry to manipulate the automotive industry. Um, the we're looking at sort of a crumbling of the facade that has kind of kept a lot of this stuff hidden. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but
But it all
like
sounds that
there's
way, and I
it
get
all
that.
kind of sounds that way, right? But like what we have now is a one party in this country that has become comfortable with no longer hiding behind euphemisms, and no longer using the tactic of ignoring key facts in order to sell their agenda. They just come right out with it now. And a euphemism is only so useful as long as it serves their interests. And it doesn't anymore. So I think it's becoming more obvious to voters that these positions, where the stated reason, for example, may be, oh, states' rights, but in reality they mean discrimination.
Yeah.
Like, it's when we're in a scenario where they're honest and upfront about it. Um, the voters who are actually in a position psychologically to be critical can't look at that and think, oh, well, if I vote for this person, I'm supporting state rights, when they've been open about it being the goal being, to get rid of all of the Mexican rapists and drug dealers, and ship them back to, where they came from. Um, that, I think, is part of why so much of this is becoming so much more obvious. But I think in addition to that, like, that's a positive thing, to the extent that we don't have to read through between the lines anymore, and the job of journalists has become much easier as a result of them not having to break down the euphemisms for people anymore. But the other side of that is the reason we have a president who calls, Mexicans, murderers and rapists and drug dealers, and tells natural born U.S. citizens to go back to where they came from,
And
is that
arranges to have them deported even if they were born here.
the base no longer needs to hear the arguments about strong borders when they accept that Mexicans are bad and need to go away.
Yeah.
It's not about security anymore. It's not about stopping trafficking. It's about stopping Mexicans. And it's always been about that. But when the base is accepting that honest position, and we're observing and to be fair to everyone who's going to have these thoughts, America has always been like this. This isn't a sudden shift of American, sentiments around, race and women's rights and all of these other issues. The issue is whether or not we've walked into a territory where these things have become normalized again. There was a time when racists used to be afraid to be racist in public. There was a time when, at least brief time, when a larger percentage of men were afraid to, can I swear on this show? Is that permissible? I should ask before the blood gets up. Is that okay?
Whatever the fuck you want. Sure.
Whatever the fuck I want. All
I mean,
right.
if the president can do it, why not?
Why not? Why not? There was a time recently when a larger percentage of men would feel at least some degree of social compulsion to not shit on women in public, right? To not be an awful person about women's bodily autonomy in public places. Um, that doesn't mean that they weren't awful misogynists. It means that they were hiding it behind, a euphemism about the rights of a child, or whatever it may be, and now they can come out and call women whatever they want and feel that it's okay because we have a party where these positions and statements have become the base of a political platform, and that's a big problem for us.
Contrasting the atheist candidate position from that of the religious right, I'm sure you saw there was an interview with one of the people that is promoting these anti-abortion bills, wherein he said that a fertilized embryo in a laboratory doesn't count as a life or a child, where it would be both if it were to inconvenience a 12-year-old girl who had been raped. Then it's a life and a child.
But
But
not
for
in the
whatever
laboratory.
reason, but not in a laboratory.
Gotcha. So it really isn't about the embryo, it's about the woman's body.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's he just came right out with it. The euphemisms are gone. A decade ago, they would have just avoided the question. Now they can say, "Oh, well, it only counts if it's a woman's body." So, yeah, and also, can we stop calling them the religious right and, like, stop pretending that anything that they're doing has any basis in any consistent application of their worldview?
Well, if they're saying that Trump was sent by God and is literally then a godsend, What would you
That's
prefer to be called them?
that's the problem I have. There's obviously a religious component to the far right in this country. Yeah, that's undeniable. But like even for like and this is something that like I almost pine for in my short time as an activist in atheism. There was at least the appearance of an attempt to have scriptural positions, or to claim they're supporting this candidate because they're living by all those good Christian values. Donald Trump doesn't embody any of those values, any of them.
I saw an interview today where there was one critic of the Clintons. He's on some TV show where he's complaining about how Bill Clinton humiliated Hillary, and Hillary shouldn't have tolerated Bill's behavior, cheating on her like that. And the interviewer immediately says, "Okay, what about? So you're saying the same thing about Trump cheating on Melania?" And the person stopped and said, "Well, let me be clear. I misspoke."
Oh, good. Okay.
Because he
So
completely forgot. It's like everybody knew that Bill Clinton had an affair. Somehow they forgot about all the affairs that Trump had.
yeah, I mean, nothing sticks to him. The John Oliver actually did something really interesting about in his last episode talking about Boris Johnson. I don't know if you got a chance to see it,
I
but
haven't.
where the guy is such a buffoon all the time that the buffoonery doesn't actually impact his political career. Like it benefits him. In fact, it's charming to a degree. Like there's nothing that this man cannot do that can sink him, because in like for us, like we can't protest anymore, and for the people who support him, they've already supported him through the worst of behavior that we could have conceived of from a president, and then some. Like there's not anything that he can do at this point that's going to drive his supporters away, unless he burns an effigy of Jesus on the White House lawn. Like I can't think of a single thing that would do it. He could, in fact, shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, and he would be fine.
Yeah, I've also saw today interviews with people that said that if Trump had shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, that they would still absolutely vote for him.
Yeah, yeah. That doesn't surprise me at all. It's a cult of personality, and I think that this is another thing that I'm going to emphasize. This is opinion, but if you want to get into it, it's Twitter handle I believe is still at Radio Atheist. I can check that real quick. I don't think I changed it. It's been a while since I've handed out the Twitter handle. Oh, I can't access Twitter. Huh.
I know that we
Oh, there
have.
we go.
I know that we have Republican conservative atheists, but I'm afraid I may have already met both of them.
Both of them. I have met one, and he's no longer a Republican. He was a Republican. He's not anymore. He left in protest. Which, I mean, he's not alone. he's really not alone. Let's see. I know the silence is riveting everybody.
Yeah, while you check your Twitter feed. It's a
Yeah,
brilliant
right?
interview, Aaron.
Yeah, you're welcome for that. So one of the things that I was going to mention when I was emphasizing this is a matter of opinion and not something that's representative of the Atheist Candidates Project. But you should still think about it when you're voting for atheists, because people who can think critically and aren't committed solely to an ideology, to some sort of dogma, those are the people you should be putting in public office if we want to fix this shit. So what we're observing isn't based on fact. Fact doesn't matter. And when you're interacting with someone who supports the policies of this current president, and they ask you to prove your position, they don't care about your proof. They don't want you to prove it. They're going to ignore it. It's not going to matter. They're going to come up with an excuse. They're going to call you a liar. What else? Some, a libtard cuck, whatever, words you want to throw out there. It's not going to make a fucking difference to these people at all, because what they are committed to isn't reason. It's not fact. It's not critical thinking. It's not, at least having good argumentation and giving people something valuable to think about. It's ideological commitment, period. This is the kind of thing that you expect from fascism. This isn't what you expect in a functioning democracy.
I'm going to quote that.
It's true. Like, and I'm working on a little bit of a side project, kind of breaking down. It's maybe it'll become something useful at some point, but it's an analysis of the political tactics of the alt-right to a degree. And now I'm not saying everyone on the right is alt-right, obviously, but memes are powerful things. And when a style of argumentation that hits all of the proper emotional buttons spreads, it tends to get picked up by other people, right? Look at how you engage with somebody who falls within that camp the next time you choose to, because I know that I know your listeners are in, and I know they're always looking for a fight. So next time you engage one of these individuals online or in person, watch as they move the goalposts at breakneck speed, because if you don't, you're going to miss it. You're going to start off with an argument, a position, or they're going to make some claim, and you're going to come on and say, no, but this is actually what's going on. And they're going to have their next argument presented as if you have accepted the first argument that they made. It's not about what facts you're presenting. There will always be an assumption in at least some of the rhetorical tactics that you are accepting their argument. There will always be an assumption, and if it's not that, it's always going to be accusatory or whataboutism. There's never going to be an honest admission or any sort of critical introspection or any sort of critical acknowledgement of facts. It's never going to happen. Just watch. Engage in a normal argument and watch what happens. The argument is going to shift from the thing you're actually talking about, which is maybe all of the times Donald Trump has cheated on his wife, to something entirely different in a matter of minutes. Something so far separated from that original discussion that you've now accepted that this is the thing we're talking about, and they don't have to answer that first question. So I realize it's going to be boring for the people who don't like to argue. But again, it's your show, so I'm guessing most of your listeners like to argue. So just keep an eye on that. Take some notes, and let me know if I was right on Twitter if you feel like it. So.
Well, it's almost daily for me, or it feels that it's almost daily when people will go through these lists like you're talking about and say, and in another example of another of your errors, and I'm like, and I have to interrupt and stop and say, no, you can't say another of if you never demonstrated a first one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens.
And I never get to a point where they say, like, the classic argument, there's no transitional species. Here's the list. Well, what about the beneficial mutations? Oh, you want to change the subject before admitting you were wrong about this other thing. Let's get you to admit you were wrong about this other thing before we get you to admit you're wrong about that too.
Yeah. Well, and you are obviously a more seasoned debater than most people. You've been doing this for a long time. But most people, I think it's partly a bit of intellectual elitism that we have on the left of, and follow me here, right? We love the idea of the smart liberal dunking on the dumbass conservative, right? That resonates with us because we live under the illusion that the world we're in gives a shit about facts. Like we are pretending that if we have the better argument and the facts, we will always win. And we get a lot of positive feels from seeing, someone dunk on a moron. But if that moron can get you emotionally invested, can get you shouting, can get you talking about the thing that they want to talk about, it doesn't matter if they win. What matters is that they're controlling the conversation. And it makes it look like they won because all they're going to give you are these tiny little quippy pieces, like these little sound bites or what you're going to get that are, pulling the conversation away from the last thing that you were talking about. And they're so wrong and so stupid that you can't help but take the bait and try to correct it. But you can't. Well, because they're never going to acknowledge. They're going to move on. And by taking the bait, you are accepting their previous argument.
You may say that
and it
this is
looks
an
like they
illusion.
won.
You
Sorry, go
may
ahead.
say that this is an illusion, but I can tell you that actually works on Star Trek Next Generation.
Yeah, and if we want Star Trek Next Generation, we need to encourage the kind of values that make that actually work in this society.
Yeah, it's very frustrating that you're absolutely right about the post-truth world and people who don't care about facts. I mean, I don't want to characterize people because I can easily see people on the left that are not not people I want to represent my side either, and I can think of some um, admirable champions
Yeah.
or at least competent champions on the right.
Well, I
Um,
can refer you to a website where you can buy a vaginal steam cleaner and bee juice for fixing your skin wrinkles. So we've got our nuts too. There's like I remember being at the farmers market. As I'm one of those weirdos that sells produce at the farmers market, right? But being at the farmers market and talking to this guy about this book that he had handed to me about essential oil healing for dogs. Um, and I'm looking through it. There are no citations. There's no bibliography, and I decide because I want to give this person an opportunity to engage critically with the thing that he had just handed me. That I'm going to talk to him about and say, hey, I noticed that there's not really any citations in here. Can you tell me where they got this information? Who wrote this? And he said, oh, I wrote it.
oh,
I'm like, the guy who just gave me an egg sandwich out of a food truck was giving me medical advice for my dog. Um, this isn't this isn't to I'm not meaning to disparage food truck operators because that was a damn good sandwich, but maybe next time a veterinarian comes up to you and tries to tell you how to make homemade pesto with zero expertise in cooking whatsoever, um, then you can tell them what to do, right? You don't give veterinary advice out of your food truck if cooking is your career and you have no experience or education as a veterinarian, right?
I expected this conversation to meander a smidge,
A little
but
bit.
yeah, but I think we've gone beyond what I thought we were going to. So
Hmm.
here now that we've completed a full hour, I want you to go ahead and tie it all back and give whatever final sale you got to your project. And I'm really embarrassed. As soon as when I said program the second time, I realized that already that I was using the wrong word. So
I've been in the world. So the show that I used to do that you were on 3 times, I think, was live. So there's no take backs. There's no you can't cut the mistakes. So trust me, I've been there where you have like problems with radio equipment in the middle of a live broadcast. That's it's not really a whole lot you can do about it. Or if someone falls out of a chair, that's even better. Not really a whole lot you can do. So I get it. I've had a few of my very public mistakes. So
I
so
very much enjoyed being on your show, by the way. I quite liked your studio. I especially liked the chemistry of the big cast that you had. I was surprised that you had that many people around the table with microphones and everything. And
Mhm.
it was to my memory great fun.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people liked it. It just at the end of 2016, I think some priorities shifted, and I went to work for for dozens of candidates in the the subsequent election. So it's I'd like to get back into it, but no promises. Everyone who might have been a listener to Unbelievers Radio or Sunday Schooled or Third Shift or any of the other shows. Maybe we'll see. But if you are interested in the current project and the thing that was probably going to be the natural transition for me, and that's getting critical thinkers elected to public office. So the person with the essential oils book at the farmer's market doesn't get to make policy. Um, you should support the Atheist Candidates Project. And I realize that not everybody has money. You can support it in other ways. You can share it on Facebook and Twitter. You can find an interesting post on there, tweet that out, leave a comment, like it online. You can go to atheistcandidates.com. You can register to be a volunteer. If you are a professional of some sort, whether you're in graphic design and IT, you're a writer, you've worked on campaigns, you can tell us that you are willing to work for atheists, what you charge, and we can connect you with campaigns who want to hire within our own movement. That alone can make a big difference. And if you want to run for office, by all means, register as a candidate at atheistcandidatesproject.com. Now, the last thing I got to ask you for is, and I hate to do this, but we do need resources, and I'm still working for a living, so I'm doing this I'm not getting paid to do this. The money that's coming in is keeping the website up and paying for some digital ads, but I'd really like to be able to buy a billboard. And if you want to help us get some earned media for the project, so we can make a splash and actually spread this project nationally, go to atheistcandidates.com and become a recurring contributor. You can decide how much you're donating, and you can even make a one-time donation. But those donations are what's going to make it possible for us to afford the infrastructure that we need, because our ambition isn't just to recruit volunteers and professionals and candidates. What we want to be able to do is build a strong movement. And that means we need to reach out to the local groups and train them on how to run campaigns. We need to teach volunteers about the ins and outs of a political campaign. We need to teach people about campaign finance laws and how to file your financial reports and things of that nature. We actually have to have an organizing effort, and that means we need the money to be able to hire people. So if you can donate anything at all, atheistcandidates.com, that would make a huge difference in our ability to elect skeptics and critical thinkers to dig us out of the trouble that we're in right now.
Andre Salais, thank you very much for being on and representing the
It's always a pleasure.
The Atheist Candidates Project.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Let me know anytime you have a vacancy in the show. I'll be happy to chat.
All right, and links below. Any relevant links for donations or whatever, make sure you include those.
Gotcha. I will make sure I send those off to you so you can add those to the show notes.
All right. Good night.
Good night.